So we'll go through a few concepts here, both in GRE math subject tests, as well as a few SQL and a few NLP concepts. So onto slash surjective functions mean that every output or every a value in the range has an appropriate input. Right? So if we have our real numbers to real numbers, every single real number can be mapped to an appropriate input. So if we have, for example, 2, 4, 6, 8, and so on as our range, each of these have to be mapped to at least one input. If we have a value that cannot be generated that is in the possible range of values, but it's not mapped to an input, then that is not one to one, right? So that is what well onto or that is what onto is. That's what onto is. Every single value in the range should map to an input. One to one, you can test this just by the horizontal line test. Instead of the vertical line test to determine if it's a function, if you do the horizontal line test, that determines if it's one to one. So x squared over its entire domain, negative infinity to infinity, is not one to one, and that is because for the same y value, for example, let's say for example 4, that maps to -2 and 2, right? So squared both equal 4. So because we have two inputs mapping to that 4, it's not one to one. Now, if the function is one to one and it is onto slash surjective, then it is also bijective. And one of the properties of bijective functions is that the inverse are exactly, if you evaluate the function at its inverse, you get back the value of x. And so if you take x, you compute its inverse, and you plug it back into the original function, you should get back x. Okay, so the inverse, this is completely invertible, and you can see that the inverses are true inverses. Conic sections are all of the shapes that you get by splitting a cone. So you split a cone, get a circle, you can get a parabola, you can get a hyperbola. And if we just take the example of, let's say, a hyperbola, we know vertex is HK, P represents the distance from the vertex to the focus, also representing the distance from the vertex to the directrix, should be the same. We go here, something like this. This might be the focus. This might be the directrix, line of directrix. And hyperbola is such that all points are equidistant from the directrix and the focus. That is, the hyperbola is the locus of points for which all points are equidistant from the focus to and the directrix. Now, if we have an ellipse, special property about ellipse is that the sum of the distances, it is the locus of points for which the sum of the distances to each of the foci are a constant value, and that constant value is 2 times the length of the major axis, or the length of the radius of the major axis, 2a. Okay, so if you pick any point and you sum the distance to each of the foci, you will get a constant value to a for when that is across all of the locus of points. Special case of this is a circle where we have just the center, which you can call the vertex, which is the foci. There is no foci. Foci would be the vertex. That is all points that are equidistant from that center. That is the circle. And then finally, we have an hyperbola, which is all points where the difference between the distances to the foci is a constant. So in ellipse, it was the sum of all locus of there's the locus of points for which the sum of the distances to the foci is a constant here. Hyperbola is the locus of points for which the difference to those loci to those foci is a constant value. So that's hyperbola. And we have many forms to express hyperbola. Parabolas, hyperbolas. There's the general form. There's the typical something like this form where you can extract the centers, asymptotes, vertex, vertices, and the foci. And we also have eccentricity, which represents how circular or non-circular the ellipse or hyperbola or conic section is. So for a circle, we have eccentricity of 0, right? Because it is not non-circular. Right? So how non-circular is it? So the greater that it is from being a circle, the farther it is from being a circle, the eccentricity will increase. Implicit differentiation is a great example of chain rule. If you have x squared plus y squared equal 25, take the derivative with respect to x, 2x plus 2y. Y is in terms of x. Y is a function of x. And so that is why here we could see we could see the chain rule where it's the derivative of y squared, which is 2y, times that derivative of y of x, which is dy dx. And so that would equal 0. And then we can solve for dy dx, which refers to the sensitivity of y for a small change in x. How much does y change for a given change in x? That is dy dx. Not related rates are all about one value changes or one quantity changes per a variable, and another quantity changes also per that same variable, and typically it is time. And both of those are related to one another. So if we want to find out how much does the volume change of, let's say, an expanding balloon by how much the radius is expanding with respect to time, we're able to figure that out. And the way we can do this is we know that dv, the change in volume, is 4 pi r squared dr dt. Right, so dv dt. So how much the volume changes as the time changes equals 4 pi r squared times how much the radius changes as the time changes. Because r is a function of time, r of t, v is a function of time, v of t. So what this is, v of t is 4/3 pi r of t cubed. These are all functions of time. These variables, volume and radius, are functions of time. As the radius changes with respect to time, we want to find out how much does the volume change with respect to time. And we can do that by taking the derivative. The sensitivity of volume with for perturbations in time equals 4 pi r squared times the sensitivity of radius with those perturbations in time. Integration technique. So we have U sub, integration by parts. U sub you use when you know that when you take the derivative of the quantity as your U and that derivative expression is in your integral that you're trying to take the derivative of, then you use U sub. So for example, we have something like this, 2x times x squared dx. Our U can be x squared, and that derivative is actually already 2x dx. So that makes our du, it's just integral of u du. And so anytime you have the result of the derivative in the integral, anytime you have the result of the derivative of the u that you are proposing to make in the integral itself, then that is you have u sub. Another technique is partial fractions, where you are able to decompose a quotient into partial fractions, and then you can integrate each of those fractions separately. So if you have, for example, 1 over 1 minus x, 1 minus 2, you can decompose this into 2 separate fractions, and you can take the integral of each of these, which is much easier to take than the original integral. Integration by parts is integral of v du equals uv minus integral of, or it's technically udv. So you want to pick your u, you want to pick your dv, such that when you take the integral of v to u, that integral is actually much simpler, more simple than the original integral. Sometimes you fall for a u, you typically follow y8, and you pick the u that is closest to the dub. So logs, inverse trig, algebraic, uh, exponential, trigonometric. Right, so follow light, but key concept readers, you want, whenever you're picking your u and dv's, you want to make the integral of v to u as easy as possible, at least easier than the integral that you are starting off with. We think about a unit circle as all coordinates are cosine of theta, sine of theta, and polar coordinates are all, instead of having defining a point by its y direction and x direction, you define it by a specific radius and the angle from the radius. So it is all a shift in the definition of how you define a point. Instead of the x and y horizontal vertical direction, it is now the radius and the angle that you are inclining to. And so that's a lot of GRE. SQL modeling and metrics. SQL is not just a way to query data, but it's a way you can create new aggregations. It's a way to create new metrics and business logic, incorporate that into creating new columns and metrics such as customer lifetime value. Distributed processing in Spark SQL. Anytime you run a query in Spark, it creates a DAG, which has these tasks and creates an execution plan for the command, the SQL query that you have written, and only after it sees a dot collect or a dot show or an appropriate action does it actually execute it. If you just write a select, if you just write a query, it's not going to execute that query by itself. It's going to create a DAG. It's going to create an execution plan. It only gets executed. It only gets triggered when it gets an appropriate action, when an appropriate action is triggered upon it. So those appropriate actions are collect, that show, things like that. Now filter or group by, those build the DAG. And so even in SQL, we have first an execution plan is being developed to run the query. What resources, what types of scans should the optimizer do in order to best efficiently execute the query? We have ERD diagrams or entity relation diagrams to show the relationship between different tables, between different join keys, and illustrate how certain tables are related to one another, how fact tables are related. A view is a stored instruction. It's still a query. It is not the results of a table, but it is a stored query that makes it easier for the next time you want to run the same query on a new set of data, refresh data, you're able to do that. Materialized view is the results of that query. So you can think of that as almost a separate table, but those results are actually stored. This creates some overhead in the sense that if you do have refresh data, you're going to need to repull the results. A view, you can think of it almost as a stored recipe, a stored instruction layer where the query is not run, but the instructions for running the query, aka the query itself, is stored. And so it is easier whenever you want to reuse that query. Clusterable versus non-clusterable indices. Clusterable indices have an order, so these are mainly the primary keys that define the order of the rows. Non-clusterable indices are almost a lookup table where you associate so for example, if you want to, if you're doing a select star on where, this ID equals 5 in like a million rows, having a lookup table, having a non-clusterable index will help make that more efficient, because what it will do is point each row or point each of the values in the column to a specific row reference. And when it runs the query, it can simply go to this lookup table and directly go to that row reference that it's referring to instead of doing a full search table scan that takes up a lot of resources and time. Manage unmanaged tables in SQL. Manage tables. Spark actually has access and control over the data. External data unmanaged table is the data is controlled externally. UDF user defined function or what the user defines when they want to create a new column or a variable for a certain function. So this could be a certain calculation. This could be a certain logic based upon other values. This is a function the user creates, and they can apply that to create another column, for example. Hive used to store metadata about the table. Basics of like transformers. Tokenization is splitting the entire sentence into tokens, not words specifically, because that will create a huge vocabulary base. So we want to tokenize, split the entire sentence into different subwords, and then to capture the positional value or the importance of the order in the sentence, we do positional encoding, and then we have transformer blocks and layers of self-attention to extract the long-range contextual meanings of sentences, and then we apply the feed neural net. And so for attention layers, they extract query key and value vectors. These make it easy for the layer to identify what words are important, what words will convey meaning to other words. And the matrices for query key and value are learned through training. Now let's go over a few of VP3s. L5, making someone honest, deceitful. Solid foundation, Shastra's own thought process. Physical indriyas cannot be controlled by antakaran, controlling antakaran alone, but the antakaran can be controlled by controlling the physical indriyas. We have remedies to how to control the physical indriyas, how to control the antakaran. L6, purifying the company. One keeps avoiding company as Satsang who has faith in God but believes themselves to be the body, says jerks, discouraging things, speaks encouragingly but emphasizes his own efforts. And which company do you want to keep and want to have? Are those who are fulfilled in the very life and the force of these vicious natures do not influence them. Even when God is pleased, and even when God is displeased, you do not follow an order that has this full of adharma. So this is all in the last 6, purifying the company. Purifying the company. So at 12, 6 levels of faith, lowest, intermediate, highest. And even if someone doesn't have this, that lowest level of faith can develop into the highest if a listener listens with intense Shraddha, reverence, and condemnation. You can think, oh, falling person will fall from satsang, believing oneself to be the body. And that person may have aversion for the bunch of vishis, but you can develop, and you can recognize him. You can recognize him by the fact that they will become troubled and extremely upset if they were to engage in these pleasurable things. But to develop aversion for those is to understand God's glory realization. And if when you do understand this glory, you behave as a servant of servant before the sun. So the example, learned God's glory, yearn for dust for the feet of gopis. And we have a British governor analogy. So if a poor man enters, but was not given a seat or welcomed, not become angry at all because he's realized the importance of the British official. So realize glory of something, then they never become upset. Find faults only themselves and never in the sun. 4 types of eminent spiritual people. We have the Ragnaviraga Bhakti qualities of those small flame, torch, lightning, geothermal, pradvana, fire. Stays in ocean without being extinguished. It drinks sea water, excretes it as sweet water. So in the same way, this God's Brahma becoming something, they transform these salty jeeves into the sweet jeeves. What about 5? I picture NY or NV and not perceiving why and God and performing similar great service. Destruction of the Jeev happens when you harm God, devotee of God, Brahman, one who is meek. Because if you harm anyone else, then only the body is destroyed, but the Jeev is not destroyed. But if you harm one of these four, then the Jeev is also destroyed. 3-2 attainment of all Purusharths is when one attains the company of a sant and has verb conviction for the manifest form God as they do for the non-manifest form. And they still have attained liberation while being alive. So that's the highest state of enlightenment or liberation. Iron nail, innermost principle, nothing more blissful. God instant. Profoundly attached to one body, similarly attached to God and so absolutely loyal. Iron nail, firmly affixed, iron surface can never be separated. Firmly affixed to the feet, holy feet of God, not up to die or to attain the holy. They have attained it while being alive. So that is iron nail. Is also ultimate liberation while being alive. We will stop there.